Alice, I'm so glad that we were able to get together and do this.
Me too.
We've been having a conversation like this on just mental health, politics, policy for feels like over a decade now.
You were in college when we met, right?
I was 20.
Yeah. You
Not 20 anymore.
You were essential in helping us complete our first documentary, How to Touch a Hot Stove. And I'm very grateful. I don't think that film would have gotten done without you. And, you're not a mental health professional and you're not a filmmaker, but you made it happen. And I'm very impressed with that. Now, most people couldn't do that. Keep that in mind. But you can.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
And, I've just been so grateful for all your work as a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst who's just passionate about trying to find solutions to how we, resolve, maybe that's not the word you'd like, but address interpersonal conflict, like taking the concepts of mental health and bringing them to society at large.
Yes, that's been my passion for at least the last decade or two, because I've been doing individual work for 45 years, and I can see how many of the ideas that we have in the individual arena can be transferred onto the world stage, and it's not happening.
Right.
For example, I talk about this all the time. The dialectical behavioral therapy is a new, essential, very effective treatment, and it's all about coexistence of opposites and helping people with trouble tolerating their emotions, impulsivity, difficulty, just regulating emotions, to see that it's possible for opposites to coexist, that I can love you and be really, really angry at you at the same time. And it's not one or the other. I don't have to idealize you or devalue you.
Yeah.
And, same thing, I want to keep my money and I would like to be generous at the same time.
Yeah.
That's government.
We do need to find the yin and yang of things.
Yeah, but the way politics is these days, it feels borderline. It feels like we're split. So, my side is all good and your side is all bad. And, you must be selfish, or you must be racist, or you must be sexist, or you must be something. And that's just not true of individual people.
And in the mental health world, you've talked to people of viewpoints that are certainly different from the status quo of the industry. Particularly, you've gone out of your way to talk to and ascertain the position of conservative thinkers and people with conservative viewpoints. How has that been received?
Actually, not so well by my own liberal community. It's very often I'm like hanging out with those white supremacist types, and it's when you talk to people individually, it's not about that. That's not a thing. It's not a psychiatric thing. There's no diagnosis code for white supremacists. You're a person who came to believe what you believe in a very complex way, just as authentic as someone else. And I'm fascinated by how people come to believe what they believe. And it troubles me when people say, "Oh, he's one of those." You're talking to someone like that, and that's just not humanity.
Right. I think, to the point of the yin and yang, I feel like we're stuck, whether it's the industry itself or just society in general. I think we're stuck where we're doing grace or truth, and we have to do grace and truth, which isn't me. Jesus said that, right? But I start with love, right? I like the M. Scott Peck definition of love, which is, he was a psychiatrist in the 1970s who defined it, while acknowledging his definition would be imperfect. He said that love was the will to extend oneself for one's own or another's spiritual growth. But love is not a feeling, it's an action. You actually have to have the will to extend yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I think grace and truth provide a way of doing that. To start with, truth is, you actually, when there are hard truths that you have to deal with, you have to deal with them. You can't have anything goes moral relativism.
Mm-hmm.
That I think sometimes the mental health industry is willing to embrace in one direction, but then unwilling to have grace in another direction. So you have to do truth, where if we love people, we can't lie to them. And then we also have grace, where we meet people wherever they are, and we believe that there is the possibility for transcendence and hope and redemption.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can do both of those things together, and inject some transcendence into the mix, then we can get just beyond viewing people as irredeemable.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it gives us enough flexibility where we establish standards and best practices, and we tell people what's going to work and what's not going to harm them. And we also leave open, we also meet people where we are, because we all have brokenness within us, and we all would benefit from more reflection and more awareness and more growth.
Meeting people where they are. I mean, it is exactly what needs to happen, is
Right.
what I do, all day, every day. But how does that happen politically? I mean, when you're trying to establish policy for large groups of people who are very different.
Right. Well, I think it's, first off, you have to be in relationship with people. You can't do love, grace, or truth if you're not talking to them. For me, as a conservative, I feel government is limited. So I'm not always looking for the policy solution. I don't think you can, with mental health, for example, just like we are, ever since the time we've known each other, in this 10-15 year period, we've had more awareness, more anti-stigma campaigns. We have the Affordable Care Act, we have healthcare, Medicaid expansion. We have all these things that are supposed to improve the lives of people, especially young people, where the age of onset of mental health issues often emerges, supposed to improve mental health. Yet our mental health as a country is worse off than it's ever been before. We have over 100,000 people dying of overdose deaths.
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago, that wasn't even a tenth of that number,
Yeah.
I don't believe. The mental health and the depression and anxiety among our young people, the suicide rates that have increased dramatically.
Yeah.
So all the work that we've been doing in, let's say, public health, a lot of times aided with government money,
Mm-hmm.
hasn't actually gotten us any closer to a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I look at this, I'm not thinking reflexively about what policy is going to make this better, because I think a lot of times it's not, government can't love you, right? Mm-hmm. Government wasn't designed nor is equipped to solve these problems. They may play a role at times, but ultimately these are things that have to happen at the individual and the community level. But when I see in the industries, they're advocating for top-down solutions. I believe that conservative principles of individual agency, personal liberties, personal responsibility, spiritually centered lives, nuclear families, things like this, these are the greatest protective factors against mental health and substance abuse
Mm-hmm.
issues, particularly for young people. But some of the things I just said, you would be reviled for saying them in certain leadership industry meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Not the individuals in the industry may individually believe it, but the collective organizational ego of these industries doesn't really permit the space for these ideas to flourish, despite the fact that they've been the ideas that have worked for countless individuals since the beginning of time.
Can you be more specific? I'm thinking about,
Yeah.
in my field, where most mental health professionals tend to be liberal. And I've always been curious about why that is. And I think it has to do with the fact that we're hands-on. We're in the trenches with individual people. And, if somebody has not experienced the kind of love and nurturing and community, whether it's a church community or a loving friendship community or a family, and they're struggling, suffering, depressed, they can't find a job because they're a little outside the box, and
Right.
And they need support, and they need something from somewhere.
They do.
And I agree that the government can't love you, but the government can help you pay your rent, or can help you just survive if you need a job, if you need medication, if you need. I think it's hard for us to say, well, you have a victim complex. Maybe they do. Maybe 10 years of psychoanalysis would help them figure out the victim complex. But in the here and now, that doesn't do any good to, if you're in pain. somebody's got to help you from somewhere. And I think that's where, you know, we look to the government, because what else is there?
Right. I think that would explain. I think that instinct to want to help would explain why individuals entering the social work profession may very naturally lean towards a liberal view, because the idea is, all right, these people, we want to provide support, and this seems to be a way of accessing quick support for people. So it seems to be a rather logical leap that people in the helping professions might look to the government to help. There's nothing illogical about that. I think the challenge is really asking the question, can the government help? How much can the government actually help? And having the sort of taking that step back and saying, can the government actually successfully address this? And at this point in time, where, since the 1960s, we've seen a massive increase in government support for individuals ever since the war on poverty, really. You'd think with the tons of money we've spent, we would have improved certain conditions. And, liberals, some of them may say, well, we just haven't spent enough money, we need more money, that's why we haven't solved it. I would take the view that, again, money can't, or government spending can't pierce and engage your soul in the way that is needed to bring the type of healing that people are struggling with. That has to come from relationship. That has to come from individuals and communities. And so I just don't think it works very well. I'm not saying it can never work. I'm not saying we can't work together to try to find certain places where, all right, maybe if there's some spending for this type of program that fosters some sort of engagement in community, maybe communities need some resources to encourage that social capital, there might be some limited space there. But I think what happens is we reflexively, without even thinking why, go to government. Oh, let's just get more funding for this. And then what happens is, let's take like the National Association of Social Workers, right? If you were to go to their website now, they're not a 501c3 nonprofit. They're going to advocate that for the interests of their members, social work professionals. They're going to lobby to ask for more funding for government for a bunch of different types of social programs. Those social governments will eventually, allocate resources, at least in some form, to those social programs. Then the individuals, those organizations, will pay some membership dues to the organization. Maybe they'll use some of that money for training purposes, and then the things that the industry is getting trained on, indirectly through government dollars, are things that I don't think empower individuals. They're all about, things that promote, at least if you were to look at like what the agenda for the last conference was, you'd find, and I know you're not a social worker by trade, but you'd find, lots of identity politics, lots of, just lots of system stuff.
Systems, yeah.
And really nothing about empowering individuals. Everything about, well, if we just make the systems work, but systems are made of individuals. You have to address the human heart at some point.
I agree with you about that, and I've actually seen a movement away from that. You talk about grace and truth and love. I think of it in a psychoanalytic model. I was trained in the classical Freudian analysis 30, 40 years ago. But we spent 5 days a week with people, and we were so intimately attached in the transference, the relationship, the way they were open with us, the way they projected onto us, the way we worked with being a separate person, being a part of their world, a father figure, a mother figure, a figure of love or discipline, and really helped people connect with their humanity, with their soul, with their passions, in a contained environment. And now it's all, what's your symptom, what's your diagnosis, what's your treatment plan, how much does it cost, what medication are you going to give for this? Psychiatry is all medication. They're not even trained in psychotherapy, many of them. And somebody comes and they're struggling or suffering, and you're going to charge them a lot of money and give them Prozac or some, permutation of that. I don't like it. I don't. I think we're missing a huge element of that human connection.
Well, and it reminds me of what we're doing sometimes on the public health side, where the anti-stigma campaigns that particular young people are often hearing are, well, this is a brain disease, and it is, right? We can look at it that way. I'm not reflexively rejecting that, but this isn't just like the flu. This isn't just diabetes. This is much more complex. This is where the mind, body, and soul intersect. Mental health is at the forefront, and it's a mystery, right? But personal agency has a lot to do in a lot of instances with one's feelings, thoughts, and emotions, and what they're experiencing and how they can heal from their experience. Right. There is a degree, maybe not in certain severe cases of severe and persistent mental illness, right? Something like schizophrenia is, that's very biologically based, even if it's triggered by trauma. Not so much something like that, but the moderate depression or anxiety that somebody is experiencing, it's a little different from the flu. We're not computers. Yes, we could measure everything by brain chemistry ultimately, but at a certain point, we're all better off when we start to look at what role may we have played in our feelings, and what role can we play in healing and growing, and also the fact that depression and anxiety sometimes can be productive in getting to a better place. Yeah. And they are a part of life, and this is a part of the human condition. I think we are, when we radically secularize the space, because for all the things the National Association of Social Workers or other industry organizations are willing to talk about, there's a lot of things they don't talk about, like love, spirituality. Like, these things are so critical and essential to wellness. I mean,
I would add emotional literacy. Yeah. Because there's a way of reading other people.
Yes.
That is much more complex than the way we typically read. You make a sentence of any kind, and I'm going to say, oh, put it in some category. Oh, you're one of those. Or you mean this. We talk at people, we talk about them, we talk against them, but we don't talk with them.
Right.
We don't say, tell me more. And I think we should all learn to do that. So it doesn't become, generosity being handing out money or not, but generosity of spirit.
Yes. And that's what heals, right? And I think like we have to be more in open relationship with people, and that's part of the character that we want to build in people. And what I think is encouraging is we have so much wisdom in human history that helps us understand how to promote and achieve well-being, especially in difficult circumstances. I mean, life has been difficult, more difficult than now for most of human history, the things that people have gone through. And there's immense wisdom that we can draw from. Mm-hmm. That wisdom, if we embrace it, gives us a great degree of character that we can then use and take to relationships. We can, and the idea of grace and truth. These things would provide us the emotional intelligence that we need, which not only is a protective factor for mental health and the like, but it's also the things that we want industry professionals of all kinds. I mean, we want our law enforcement officers to have emotional intelligence. I think that's something we all want. Yeah. So it's something where we have to get back to these principles that are timeless. And conservatism, to me, is about conserving wisdom, right? So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't need more blog posts that are trying to say brand new things all of the time. We have, obviously, it's a free market of speech, and we're going to have people should be free to say what they want. At the same time, we can go back and look at the wisdom we already have in many instances. What we should avoid is what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery, where basically we accept what we have now as the gospel because we're doing it now, and we automatically reject what preceded us because it's of a prior generation that we've decided wasn't as enlightened. Grace allows us to realize that past generations made mistakes because we're all human. but it also means that the present generation is making mistakes, because that's the human condition. And the sooner we address that, the sooner we move forward.
Mm-hmm. I would love to start a movement. I think of it as uncancel culture. We cancel each other all the time. If you offend me, I'm going to cut you off. And social media allows us to do that so easily. You can just argue, delete, ghost, unfriend, whatever you want.
Right.
And people feel very self-righteous. But it's so much harder, but so much more meaningful to say, I really have a problem with that. Here's why. Can you talk to me? To talk with someone, to talk to them. And that's very hard work. But I think we need to learn to do that.
We do.
An individual scale, and I think policies will come from that. We'll elect leaders who can
systems are
demonstrate that they can do that. I'd love to elect a leader who can see out of two eyes at the same time.
Right looks, too. Yeah.
Right is here and left is there, and they focus, and you get clarity and perspective and depth perception.
Right.
Right now, we've got the if your right eye offends you, cut it off. Yeah.
I think this is what it means to love people. Again, you have to take action, which is not easy, right? It requires some degree of action to take interest and follow through on the spiritual growth of oneself or the other. And, to be in relationship with people requires a degree of work.
Yeah.
That's what we need to do. And I think that whether it's, we talk a lot now about social media, right?
Yeah.
But I think that, and obviously the impacts that's had on mental health, particularly for young people.
Yeah.
But I think that, again, if we look back, we can understand that it's really a larger pattern. It's the pattern of, we've talked about this in the past, of technological innovation outpacing emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So, right?
I agree. I think our scientific and technological advances are astounding, and our ability to keep up with it emotionally are just not. We're primitive in the way we think and talk to and about one another, compared to, we can bridge divides between here and Mars,
right.
And we can't bridge divides between two people who.
Right. And it requires some humility, right? To say that, that we're, as a species, right? It's our brokenness.
Yeah.
And again, I think from a mental health perspective, if we can dive in and take this more spiritual look, it's going to bring well-being for all of us. Mm-hmm. And so I think of the ego. I mean, the ego is we are in the center of our own world, of our own universe, and ego is the thing that we kind of we're never going to be able to eliminate it, because it's a feature of our survival. If we had no ego, we could all be extinct. At the same time, ego might kill us all one day. We'll see. But I think that, and what we're seeing now is, and where we have to also make advancements, is that, and you look at this on a larger scale as well, is individuals have egos, so when they form into groups, often as a result of some kind of trauma or shared experience, they form into groups, and now the group has an ego, and the group has a chip on its shoulder. And so now we have all these groups that also want to protect their own survival, also are formed out of this sort of original sin of ego. And that's when we get industries. And so what happens is if you want to have open dialogue, sometimes it's hard to do that in an organization, because the collective group ego will prevent that voice from rising. Mm-hmm. And that's why we see, in the modern mental health industry, I think we're seeing a lot of groupthink. Mm-hmm. Individuals may have different views, but as far as the voices that rise to the top, we see that happening, and so that creates blind spots. And the things we're discussing here, I think, are a reflection of what some of those blind spots are. Mm-hmm. And I think it's counter to ego. I mean, identity politics to me is the manifestation of more ego.
What do you mean?
Well, like, if you are focusing more and more on your particular identity and how it relates to other groups and other identities of people, you're focusing more on the center of yourself, in the midst of the space, rather than the work of healing and transcendence for well-being is often about the humility of realizing how small we are relative to the larger universe before us, and we can find peace in the fact that we're all part of a much larger story.
Mm-hmm.
Identity politics of today, it lacks a degree of spirituality that is different from what we saw in the 1960s, where we would have seen, civil rights protesters peacefully asking to pray with the police officers in Selma, Alabama. What an amazing offer of grace. I don't think we see that today. We see a lot of, at least what we're seeing dominantly, is a lot of anger and frustration. And I think that our industries are happy to continue to support that, and we get a lot of very high paid consultants that come out of that who have now an economic interest in keeping this going. Yet none of it's particularly healthy for anyone.
Yeah.
So, that's where I think, we need some different thoughts entering this discussion, so that we're not just letting people run around with their blind spots while things don't necessarily create healing for folks.